Hello everyone, this is Richard from Modern Healthspan. There is a view that high protein diets will harm your kidneys, and we have had a couple of questions about the topic on the channel. So when I saw this paper, a systematic review and meta-analysis of protein intake and chronic kidney disease, I thought that I would go through it. As mentioned, there is concern that there may be a correlation between high protein intake and chronic kidney disease. However, this correlation is not clear. The aim of the study was to perform a meta-analysis on the existing literature to explore this possible correlation. In the search for appropriate studies, they found over 6,000 articles, but only 6 of them fit their criteria, which included that the studies had to be prospective cohort or case-controlled studies. The risk of bias was low, but still, this is a small sample of studies. They subdivided the protein into total plant and animal protein, as well as separating out fish and seafood from the other animal proteins. Higher level of all types of protein were correlated with a decrease in kidney disease. Plant protein was best with a risk ratio of 0.77. Total protein came next at 0.82 and animal at 0.86, with fish and seafood coming in between at 0.84. We will go into more detail on these results later. And the conclusion was that higher protein intake was associated with lower CKD risk. Firstly, why might proteins be a problem for kidneys? Excess protein cannot be stored in the body, so it's metabolized in the liver to produce NH3 or ammonia. This is toxic and is further processed into urea, which is also toxic, but less so. Urea is then dispatched to the kidneys to be excreted. There are concerns that the high protein intake will cause damage to the kidneys because of the extra work that they must do clearing this urea. All of the studies were prospective cohort studies. That is to say, a cohort of participants was identified and then followed over time to see how they fared with respect to the outcome of concern, which in this case was chronic kidney disease, rather than using existing data to look back. 4 of the studies came from Asia, with 1 each from the US and the UK. Although only 6 studies matched the criteria, there were still 148,051 participants, of which 8,746 acquired CKD within the follow-up period. Turning to the results. First, total protein of any sort. So a couple of points of explanation here. The results were expressed as a risk ratio of getting CKD as a relationship to the amount of protein eaten. A risk ratio is a measure of how likely an event is to occur when compared to some benchmark. An RR of less than 1 means that it's less likely to occur, and greater than 1 means that it's more likely to occur. And a risk ratio of 1 means that there is no difference. The weighted average risk ratio was 0.82, which means that higher protein intake reduced the risk of CKD, with a p-value of 0.005. For plant protein specifically, this had a larger effect with a combined risk ratio of 0.77, while the p-value was still significant. However, they did have an outlier which had a risk ratio greater than 1, showing higher plant protein intake increased the risk of CKD. This was a Japanese study which showed benefits of animal protein, but not plant protein. The authors proposed that this might be because the animal protein was mostly seafood, which would compare to a Western diet that would mostly be red meat, and the plant protein was mostly rice, rather than a more diverse source of vegetables. Looking at animal protein, this also had a beneficial effect, though the size was smaller at 0.86. Although not shown here, they also separated out the fish and seafood animal protein, which had a risk ratio of 0.84, which is a better figure. They also looked at a dose-response curve for plant protein. They said that there was not enough data to perform this analysis on total and animal protein. Up to the level of protein shown, 45 grams per day, this always showed a reduction in CKD risk with increased protein, although it was tailing off. To me, this seems like quite a low dose, as I would like to get at least twice this amount on a daily basis. The trend of better outcomes with more protein seems clear from the meta-analysis, but trying to make this more practical, I looked into some of the papers to see how much protein they actually had. Some used a percentage of energy as a metric rather than specific numbers, but I did find this one from Korea. The participants were divided up into low protein at 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, normal protein at 0.8 to 1.3 grams per kilogram per day, and high protein at over 1.3 grams per kilogram per day groups. They were followed for 13.7 years. The hazard ratio for low protein compared to normal was 1.49. That is, the participants were 1.49 times as likely as the normal protein group to get CKD during the follow-up period, and the high protein diet had a hazard ratio of 0.63, showing a reduced risk. So you can think of hazard ratio as basically the same as the risk ratio. For completeness, here is the conflicts of interest statement, and the authors declare no conflict of interest. So in summary, higher levels of protein reduced risk of CKD by 18, 23, and 14% for total plant and animal protein respectively. If only fish and seafood was included, the animal protein, the risk was reduced by 16%. In the discussion section, the authors say there is more data for the positive impact of plant-based proteins, although animal proteins also showed benefit in the review. But this seemed to be better if it was fish and seafood based. Searching for possible negative impact of high protein on kidney function, I do find some references, especially where there is existing kidney disease. The protein in food does not come on its own, of course, and the health of the whole food, which would include fiber or saturated fats, for example, needs also to be considered. One point that I did not see covered in the paper was absorption rate of the different proteins. In general, plant protein is less bioavailable by about 10 to 20% when compared to animal protein. So the amount of plant and animal protein consumed may not come to the same as the amount absorbed. Still, it does seem reasonable that the amount of protein needed for muscle protein synthesis would not be harmful for your kidneys. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all well.